Good morning. Man, you guys are a good-looking bunch for Easter. When I was around 17, I had moved out on my own. I already had an apartment and a job. And I remember having this time where I felt like something was really missing in my life. And externally, I had everything that a 17-year-old could want. I had a job, I had responsibilities, I had money in my pocket, but there was just something that I was missing, something that I just didn't feel like I could find the answer to. It was something that I was missing that I had never known. And I remember talking to my cousin, and we were talking about this, and at the time I was an atheist. I'd been an atheist for a long time. And he was an agnostic, and we were sitting around and we were talking about this need that we had that we couldn't really identify, this need that we just couldn't really put into words. And I remember talking to him and saying something like, I feel like something's missing in my life, and I don't know if it might be God or what. And I could tell that my cousin knew exactly what I was talking about, even though we both were complete strangers to God. We both had no idea what to make of this idea of God, this person of God. And I remember being shocked that these were the words that flew out of my mouth. It was kind of one of those times where something flies out of your mouth and you're like, where did that come from? But I could tell that he knew what I was talking about, that longing that he just couldn't put into words. And I would never have imagined, like 10 years later, how much my life would change from that point. And really, at that point, it was hard to imagine what a relationship with God could even look like. I didn't know the first thing about God. God was a total stranger to me. And later, a lot later, I came to believe in God, and I had these new bounds that were in my life, but I felt like I had all this information about God. I moved to the next level of learning about God, head knowledge about God. But I still felt like something was missing, like I couldn't go forward, like it wasn't firing on all cylinders. Like I had this head knowledge about God, but it just didn't shake down into my heart. And you probably could have, asked me questions about God, asked me questions about the Easter story, and I probably could have given you a lot of the right answers, but it just didn't seem like it mattered right here. One thing I think that we miss about Easter is that Easter is a journey. And the journey isn't just Jesus' journey from birth to teaching, to his death on the cross, to going into the grave and rising again. There's something about this journey that's also our journey. And lots of us are in a lot of different places when it comes to that journey. And for some of us, the Easter story has really intersected with our stories. It has touched our lives and has transformed our hearts. It's brought about its own form of resurrection within us. We share a life with God and in God together. Earlier in John, there's this scene where Jesus is given this really hard teaching, and the crowds that have been following Jesus around start to leave because they just don't think that following Jesus is worth it. And Jesus turns to his disciples and Peter, and he says, "Are you going to leave too?" And Peter gives him this answer. He says, "Where can we go? You alone have the words of life." I think we find ourselves on that journey, that same journey that I experienced of coming to know things about God and coming to experience the words of life. From that propositional knowledge of God to that personal, transforming knowledge of God. In Mary's story here that we just read, we see this as her, standing in front of Jesus, thinking he's this gardener. And she moves from misrecognizing Jesus and thinking he's this gardener to understanding that he really is her personal Lord and teacher. I think that describes our journey. And some of us perhaps are strangers to God, maybe even like Mary standing right in front of him. not recognizing his work in our lives, not recognizing his work around us. We just don't have the eyes to see it. Others perhaps have accepted the work that Jesus did for us. And we're on that leg of the journey where we're trying it out. We're experimenting with our faith. We're testing what it means to live like the resurrection is true. Yet others have experienced a deep understanding of that. They've experienced the resurrected life. And they keep coming back to that source of living water that sustains us and changes us and meddles with our lives, meddles with our motivations and our hearts. And we're each on that journey somewhere. And the truth is that no matter how far we've come, none of us have arrived. We each have our own response for this season of our lives to the story of Easter, the story of resurrection. And many of us are still experiencing the gift that is learning to see God, just as Mary and Peter and John did. And we experience the surprising truth that God is up to something around us, even within us. As John reminds us in his experience, first he saw, then he believed. And over again, this passage in various ways talks about seeing. Talks about seeing kind of superficially and a journey to seeing even deeper. For each of the people involved, it's a process. The first two disciples, they come, they see a little bit, they understand a little bit, and they leave. Mary stays. She understands even more. They keep changing. What they see keeps changing as they slowly waken up to the reality of the resurrected Lord. And for them, it unfolds like a movie. They see it, but they just don't get it. They don't see what it is that they're seeing quite yet. I think we do that with God. We slowly see God pull back the mystery and reveal himself to us deeper and deeper. We can't just get all there is right there, right at the first pass. In our spiritual lives, we don't start out with a face-to-face encounter with the risen Lord often. We don't start out with an angel, with a flaming sword beside our bed. We don't see the stone blown away and rolled back. I think a lot of us start out looking at like an empty tomb. We start out seeing what is missing. And we have to go on the quest to find out what it is that's missing and what is the story behind this thing that's missing. For some of us, the empty tomb is like a big giant hole in our hearts. A God-shaped hole that no matter what we try to stuff in it, nothing will fill. We could try to load it with lots of things. We could load it with busyness. We could load it with materialism. We could load it with all these goods. In my case, we could load it with drugs and alcohol and parties. And it doesn't fill that. It doesn't fill that hunger within us. Some of us deny that hungry place. But often it is our hunger and thirst for God that pulls us on that quest to go down into the tomb and see what's down there. And it's that same hunger that pulls us out to go and follow Jesus and experience the resurrected life. God offers us a whole lot more than a blood-stained ticket to heaven. He wants you and me to taste eternal life right now, in this very moment. He wants you to do a whole lot more than just believe in the resurrection. He wants you to live a life of freedom and hope in response to that resurrection. The story of Easter is a story of a God who loves you, a God who came on an all-out rescue mission to save you, a God who came and made himself like us so that he could transform us to be like him. The story of Easter is that he did this for you. He died for you. But more than that, he triumphed over death to set you free. The cross of Christ isn't the end of the story, neither is the empty tomb. These things are all pointing beyond themselves to the fact that the cross and the grave didn't win. He is risen. he rose for you and for me. I think the church has gotten something wrong about Easter for a very long time. We look at it as a definitive statement. We look at it as we expect people to believe first. We don't expect people to open up their eyes and see. We've demanded people to blindly follow things they don't yet have the eyes to recognize. And like Mary and Peter, I think we come before God and it's a mystery. We don't understand everything that's going on. We don't understand what to make of what we see at first. The scripture that we read, we see both the disciples, Peter and John, come and not understand what they were seeing. They experienced 3 years with Jesus, him teaching them from the scriptures. They came, they found an empty tomb, and they still didn't understand what they were seeing. It had to be revealed to them. You know, Mary comes along and she waits. And she waits and she sees an angel sitting on a rock. She comes face to face with Jesus, and she still doesn't recognize it. These are the people that were there, you know? I think we can have a little bit of patience with the newcomer who's struggling in the face of not being there. You know, these people had their struggles with accepting this mystery that God was revealing to them. When I was a kid, I remember one time I went to the doctor's office and they had this book. I don't know if you've ever seen a Where's Waldo book. You know what I'm talking about? I'm pretty old, probably dating myself by talking about Where's Waldo. But I remember the first time I encountered that Where's Waldo book and I was trying to find Waldo for the very first time, and it felt like an eternity. You know, scanning around the page, strolling my eyes up and down, looking at every little thing, trying to find this little hipster guy with a coffee cup, you know? And the first time I found Waldo, I felt like I had arrived. I felt like I had unlocked a little bit of that mystery. When I was a kid, they had these other really interesting books about learning how to see. They had these 3D pop-out books. You know what I'm talking about? The ones that you gotta like hold up to your face and pull them away. Kind of looks like a sponge painting or something like that. And then you pull it out, and this image pops out, whether it's a sailboat or a swan or whatever it is that's locked away in there. And I remember the first time that somebody was trying to tell me about that picture that was there, that hidden picture, and I just couldn't see it. And I thought I was going to go mad trying to do this and trying all these different things. Maybe some of you out there never could see that. You know, you still never got to the blessing of that little 3D image that pops out. You know, eventually I got to the point where I could flip through one of those books, and every 2 seconds I could see the next image. Boom, boom, all the way through the whole book. But I had to relearn how to see before I could see what was really there. I think before we can believe, we need to learn how to see again. It's kind of like those books. It just doesn't seem natural. It just doesn't happen at first. Someone has to show us the way. We have to learn to see something new and how to see again. To open up our minds to the possibility that we have a blind spot. And that God can help us with that blind spot, help us to see what's really there, to see the Easter story at work in our lives. We're all on a journey, but we don't all start in the same places. We're not all moving at the same speeds. But all of creation is on that journey, and whether they know it or not, it's a journey that will bring us face to face with Jesus. And when we get to that point where we're standing before Jesus, you know, will we see him as a stranger, or will we see him as an old friend? I think that's the question for us today. And I think the answer to that has a lot to do with what it is that you see right now, what it is that you're looking for. How long we're going to gaze at the mystery of God, or if we're going to give up and quit before the miracle happens. You and I can't go back in time and look into the empty tomb and see the hole that's there. We can't see the rock and the angel and all these things that the early disciples got to see. But we can see the aftershocks of the Easter story. We can see the people around us that live resurrected lives. And we can ask God to show us even how we must die to ourselves to be able to see this story of resurrection at work. Within us all, I think, is that hope of resurrection. The call for God to help us roll back those stones and follow him. And I dare you to pray for that, to pray for the eyes to see. I dare you to let God show you your life through the lens of the gospel story. For me, seeing is believing. But like Mary, sometimes we need a little help to understand what it is that we're looking at. And those of us who know the power of God at work in our story embrace this and should embrace not only seeing but also hospitality of helping someone else see. The outsider, the person who doesn't quite get it, like the first kid that showed me how to see in that book, to come alongside people and use our voice to call them back to it. To be the hands and feet of Jesus that help roll away that stone that keeps people stuck down in that grave. And like Mary, I don't think we can keep the story to ourselves. We have to share it. We have to have a response to it. We have to go out and tell people about our experience. Mary's message was really simple. I have seen the Lord. I think if it's real, that's all it takes. It doesn't take hours of training. It doesn't take a dramatic testimony. It just takes a little bit of passion and a little bit of willingness to share our life with someone else. It takes an eye to see those around us who are still struggling, looking at the book, not sure what's going to pop out of them. We're each on a journey. We each come to God from different places with different needs. Us are still trying to stuff stuff down in that hole that never seems to fill. And I think we should take the view of like a little kid on an Easter egg hunt. Little kids on Easter egg hunts, they have to stop and look and scan every little bit of ground that's there to find those treasures that God has for us. Have to stop and look again. And I think God is like a parent looking down on his children on that Easter egg hunt, wherever we're at in our story. He looks down and he's smiling at us as we make our own discoveries, wherever we are on our journeys. It doesn't matter how many Easter eggs we have in the basket. It doesn't matter about just the finding. It's the seeking that gives him pleasure. The only thing that we can do wrong is quit too soon. Quit too soon before we find all there is for us out there. As fun as Easter egg hunts and family dinners and coming to church on Sunday might be, don't settle for that. Easter is more than peeps and plastic grass, a new dress and a family barbecue. The story of Easter can't stay stuck on the page. It has to be poured out through us. It has to come through us as the very words of life. God doesn't call us simply to hear it, but to respond to it. To share the story of not only how Jesus saved the world, but how he's saving you and me right now. Easter isn't just about something that God did way back when. It's about what God is up to right now in our hearts, in our lives, in our relationships, and in our world. So this Easter, I dare you to ask God for some new eyes, for new ears to hear, for new lips to tell, of the story of transformation that Jesus enacted that day is still transforming our world, still moving through us. I dare you not to settle for God as a stranger, but to seek him out as a teacher. To not settle for an empty tomb, but to keep chasing after it until you find the person of Jesus. To not settle for some blood-stained ticket to heaven, but for transformation that meets you right here in the present moment. God has more to offer those who keep chasing the mystery than we have found so far. He has more to offer us than just an empty tomb. He offers himself. And I just ask you this Easter not to settle for anything less. We're going to go into a time of open worship, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it's a time of waiting for God to speak. It can be a silent time. It can be a time of hearing a message from God. And if you feel like God is tapping you on the shoulder or tugging at your heart, and you have a message that he might be bringing forth from you, then stand, and a microphone will be brought to you. I just ask that you wait for that microphone. There are a lot of people who won't be able to hear it if you don't. And just listen together for what God might reveal to you this morning.